You know, when I was growing up as a kid, I used to listen to a band called Def Leppard. And a lot of people know who Def Leppard is. Pour Some Sugar on Me, Hysteria, Pyromania. And probably one of the best touring bands of all time. Now, some people might disagree, but anytime you've been around for 30 years and your name comes around with other bands like Fleetwood Mac, you've done something right. There's a song called Gods of War. It was on the Hysteria album. And I remember having the record when I was younger because we didn't have the tape cassettes and the CDs and MP3 players yet. And I absolutely was enamored with the song. And it was fantastic. And as always, had a real steady drum beat. Now this is after Rick Allen lost his arm as a drummer. But it had that kind of digital thump sound that was really bassy, and then Rick Savage laying the bass track in the back was just as thick as the bass drum, that the digital bass drum that Rick Allen was kicking. And then Phil Collen would come in with soft crescendo style music building up into the great riff that he would do that only lasted 10 or 12 seconds. And then of course, you know, Joe Elliott wailing the music and screaming like a banshee or a siren. And no, this isn't a promo for Def Leppard, but that song, if you haven't heard it, you should go listen to it because it was very impactful, very similar to Land of Confusion by Phil Collins / Genesis, which was an amazing act of puppeteering with Margaret Thatcher and the Ayatollah and Ronald Reagan, and it was amazing. Well, Gods of War didn't have a video, but the song stood on its own merit. And inside you would hear quotes from Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. And one of the things I remember more than anything, sorry, my allergies are killing me this morning, that I remember in the song that was just truly amazing is, we don't negotiate with terrorists. And to hear Ronald Reagan say that, I don't think I understood what it meant at the time. But when you go back and look at what happened with Beirut, what happened with the Iranian hostages, the failures of Jimmy Carter trying to get those hostages back. And of course, a lot of people will say the Iran-Contra hearings and Ronald Reagan peddled, arms to Iran and the Contras in exchange for hostages. Yeah, you can say that, but you also have to remember one of the things Reagan did is that when he was talking about his campaign and talking about his party platform, and he was running for president, the one thing he said when he was asked about the hostages was fairly simple, and said, on day one, we will go in and we will get them. And there will be no quarter. And he put Iran on notice. And the thing about Reagan that people really admired about him is that he didn't have a bark without bite. He had no problem flexing the arms of freedom and democracy. And whether it was having a secret war between the KGB Politburo and the FBI and the CIA on American soil and Russian soil, or in South America, Cuba, wherever, Ronald Reagan believed in military force versus weakness. And this is where Margaret Thatcher and he became such close friends, and their administrations, although very different in two very different style of governments, became symbiotic with each other on their stance on terrorism in the world. And it really has been a Republican ideology for a better part of the last 35 years. And the reason we don't negotiate with terrorists is simple. It is a place of not only weakness, but of unmeasurable loss. Because not only do you encourage every other terrorist group to do the exact same thing, you also fund these terrorists to continue operations where normally putting sanctions or seizing funds or taking out the major donors to these terrorist groups through countries like UAE and Qatar and Egypt and other places like Libya that house and train terrorists, you can focalize your military might and strength and economic pressure to really harm these groups from a fiscal and financial standpoint, which is much better than putting troops in harm's way. Yesterday, Joe Biden, while careening around Vietnam during 9/11, and of course, everyone thought his stop in Alaska was so virtuous, but that's just simply where Air Force One refuels, and it stops there every time that you have a Southeast Pacific tour, refuels in Alaska, and then heads back to Washington and Edwards, is that they released something that the Senate was not notified on. Gain of 8 wasn't notified on. And of course, it wasn't an act of war, but it is a change in U.S. policy. We saw Bill Clinton do it. We've seen Barack Obama do it with pallets full of cash to Iran, swapping terrorists with American citizens. And with George Bush, we had to see these horrendous videos of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. I am just going to itch my nose, man, because I am outside, and it's in fuego. We saw George Bush see these videos of beheadings, and they were horrific, but you didn't see the negotiation that you see from Democrat presidents. And Joe Biden decided to swap 5 Americans who obviously were being held by Iran, release 5 Iranian prisoners, and that should be the end of that, right? It's an even swap. It's 5 for 5. But then somehow Joe Biden and his administration decided to release $6 billion in sanctioned money to Iran through the Bank of Qatar. Now, supposedly attached to this, and there was no oversight done to this, so the veracity of this, the actual, is the proof in the pudding, is that this $6 billion will only be used for aid and food and humanitarian needs. But since when has the Shahs of Iran and the clerics cared about the people? The top 3% rule in Iran, and the rest are essentially slaves and peons to the clerics and the Shahs of Iran. There's nothing to ensure that a country like Qatar, although considered to be a soft ally, has been responsible for supporting terrorism in the last 2 decades, along with United Arab Emirates. And if you have money for food and humanitarian aid, doesn't that lead you to believe that instead of spending that money on those things in order to at least do the bare minimum, you no longer have to spend that, so now you can use it to enrich your nuclear program or invest in more terrorism? It is a horribly naive process and a dangerous one that Joe Biden and his administration are once again doing on 9/11, a day that was sponsored and sanctioned by terrorism. And yes, Saudi Arabia was involved. We understand that. We know that the Sauds were involved in this, and a lot of the funding came from there. We understand that Al-Qaeda was involved, Osama bin Laden. Yeah, we get all that. But what the United States didn't do was go ahead right after that and decide to go ahead and fund more terrorism to make it possible for this to happen. With the open borders and the amount of people coming over, with the unfettered access of military-age young men coming in without any background, without any investigation into who they are, is not only dangerous but naive to think that we would not have another attack on U.S. soil similar to 9/11 on the 22nd anniversary, one day posthumous from that event. We don't negotiate with terrorists. It's been a line in the sand. The United States has fervently believed in that and done that, and we certainly don't pay money for hostages. We have done some things. We've done some prisoner exchanges that I may not have agreed with. The Bergdahl exchange was incredibly naive. The Brittany Griner exchange was incredibly naive. And we've done it in the past with people holding hostage to drug lords, from drug lords to Somalian pirates to, we can go on forever. There's a difference between an exchange and giving money or fulfilling a list of demands that you normally wouldn't during a peaceful process of discourse. especially one where a gun is being held to our head. It's a dangerous game we're playing. It's reminiscent of the $150 billion and the pallets full of cash and the Iran nuclear deal. It just seems that the Democrats are soft on Iran. They're soft on terrorism. And whether it be Palestine or whether it be Iran, the Democrats really fail to protect the United States in the long term and only focus on the short-term gain. I wanted to bring you the perspective. It frustrated me yesterday. I wanted to make a quick video, even though usually today's my day off, but wanted to say thanks for listening to the Don't Unfriend Me show. You can go over and pick yourself up a shirt, some coffee at thedumshow.com. That's D-U-M. THEDUMSHOW. Thanks for watching the Don't Unfriend Me show. I'll see you guys tomorrow night for a live show. It'll be a little bit later. Ethan has a baseball game, but when we get back, we'll have a show going on. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you soon.
I'm David Boreanaz with the Cast of SEAL team, and we have an important message for returning vets.
We want you to know if you're struggling to cope, there's help and it's just a phone call away.
The Veterans Crisis Line is staffed with experienced professionals who know your struggles.
There's no greater sacrifice in service to our country. We're able to enjoy our freedoms because of it.
Your service is important, you are important.
For vets and their families, the Veterans Crisis Line is here to help 24 hours a day. Please call